Let's talk about autumn tarot decks. It is technically still August as I film this, and I'm usually reluctant to let go of summer and the daylight months. The darker half of the year is challenging for me and maybe for you too, but autumn also carries a kind of magic that I think tarot readers typically love to return to each year. It's the witchy ritual season, it's great for shadow work, cozy evenings of study, and overall, it's that liminal transitional energy as the seasons change. For my part, the vibes today are largely cozy decomposition, so make of that what you will. I've pulled together some decks that feel perfect for this moment in time. I've got some transitional decks to capture the kind of in between energy of autumn, some magical witchy decks, and some earthy decks that are going to bring some study and some grounding into my everyday practice over the next few months. If you're looking for decks that will support you in your practice as we shift into autumn, then this list should give you plenty of inspiration. Let's begin with the decks that speak to autumn as a threshold and the in-between kind of energies of this season. I promised you cozy decomposition, so let's begin with the Midnight Magic Tarot. This is such an obvious choice for autumn for me. I think I've said before actually that this deck reminds me or makes me think of like summer evenings and kind of late summer. So this is definitely one I see myself reaching for over the next few weeks as we're kind of easing into the autumn season. But mushrooms are just such an obvious autumn deck choice. I mean, it is the season of kind of death and decay and decomposition. We've got leaves falling. I'm expecting and hoping to see plenty of good mushrooms when I go out and about for walks over the next few months. And this is just the perfect deck for that. This deck also feels cozy. There is something about this that feels cozy, even though it is a deck of like mushrooms, which, like I say, are associated with kind of death and decay. I think it's the black nighttime backgrounds and a lot of the details in the artwork. It feels cozy. So this really is the archetypal cozy decomposition deck that I will be working with this autumn season. I think the art style is also, it's like a little bit hazy, a little bit dreamy. It's quite soft. It's not like a super photorealistic art style. It's not a photography deck. It's not that kind of like glossy and precise. It is a little bit softer, so it does lend it some kind of like whimsy and a little bit of magic. There's also lots of little fairy, spirity type figures throughout the deck and a lot of cards. They look like they could be little fairies. This also feels a little bit, not quite nostalgic, but it evokes the autumn season because it's kind of like a autumn woodland vibe. And a lot of these are mushrooms that I would see out and about. Maybe not the zombie ant fungus, but a lot of these are definitely fungi that I can spot out and about. And it feels just very appropriate. It is one of the most seasonally appropriate decks that I have to share in this video. So that is the Midnight Magic Tarot. The Hush Tarot is another one that I expect is also on a lot of people's autumn deck lists. It's probably on some of my autumn deck lists from previous years on this channel. And this is a deck that I have a bit of a complicated relationship with, in that I've never quite made it work for me, but I refuse to let it go. So maybe this autumn will be the time. And this is another one where the color palette feels very autumnal. We've got lots of these like muted earthy kind of colors. Even this kind of bluey gray is very autumn gloomy sky. And a lot of these cards also have that like decomposition kind of energy to them, shall we say. Like, I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of kind of plants growing through things. It does feel, here we go, like here's a good one, the star. We've got this skull here and kind of plants growing up through it like it's been there for a really long time. Nature's been growing around it. And it just feels very, very autumnal. Again, kind of outdoorsy, like lots of birds, lots of plants, lots of sort of little insects and little critters. And yeah, this is just one that I've never quite been able to get the hang of, but I refuse to give up on. and it certainly fits this kind of death and decay autumn deck grouping that I'm sharing here at the beginning of this video. But I do really enjoy this. I used to think that this was a curated art deck, but I recently reread the guidebook and I think these images were created specifically for a tarot deck, which actually makes less sense to me, because some of them really don't feel connected to the tarot meanings, but I do really enjoy it. So that is the Hush Tarot. It is one that also feels like a bit melancholic. I think this is maybe a good one for some shadow work if you like your decks to look visually on theme with shadow work. Like, it is a little bit dark, a little bit melancholic. Like I say, it is a kind of deck of decay. There's almost some like body horror elements to some of it as well, actually, which brings me very nicely to my next group of decks. So that is the Hush Tarot. And next up, I want to talk about a trio of decks. This is the Jupiter Power Tarot, the Wild Unknown Tarot. I have the Pocket Tin edition, and the Outgrow Yourself Tarot and Oracle. So this is a little group of decks that I have been playing with together over the last month, actually. During August, we were doing a multiple decks tarot lab. So we were playing around with reading with pairs and groupings of decks together. And this is one of the groupings of decks that I personally was working with. And I just think they go together so fabulously. I think the art styles look so good together. They're all a little bit spiky. They're a little bit grungy. The Jupiter Power, I think, really has some body horror elements, which I think you can see here with the Seven of Wands. The Outgrow Yourself, also a little bit body horror in some of them, but mainly is, I've called this my spiky deck before. Also, specifically the Wild Unknown here is the Wild Unknown and the similar art style in the Outgrow Yourself. Like, this is pen and ink, it's kind of scratchy. And I think the Outgrow Yourself is also like a little bit scratchy in the line work. It feels specifically like the death and decay and like decomposition season that is autumn. Like, this deck just feels like it works really well, or these decks, but specifically the Wild Unknown feels very autumnal. And I think as a trio, they can be a little bit spiky. They're not trying to be fun, they're not trying to be nice, but you can get into some deep stuff quite well with this. And I think they work well for like themes of like transition, which is very much autumn. Autumn is that transitional season between the summer and the winter. So here we go. Blossom with Death. If that's not an autumn card, I truly don't know what is. If you like to pair your decks or group your decks, this is a little trio I would really, really recommend. I think aesthetically, it's a banger. Aesthetically, they work so well, but also they read really well together. And I could not recommend them more highly. Finally, in this first little grouping of decks, I have the Death Doula Oracle, which I feel like needs no explanation as to why it's in this category of like transitional, liminal, death and decay decks. This is a deck that is quite literally made about the transition from life to death. It is a deck that is for meeting that transition, preparing for that transition. It has a really holistic approach, which I really like. And also, I think the imagery, it's this multi-exposure photography. So the imagery itself also reads the imagery reads very liminal, if that makes sense. Like, without even having to get into the theme of the deck, because it is quite literally two different images layered together and you can see neither one of them clearly, and they're kind of making a whole new image together. This deck in particular, the Death Doula, I think is really good for that like personal metamorphosis, which I think we all, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us go through that in the autumn. It feels like a big personal transition. Personally, my birthday is at the end of September, so autumn season is a bit of a transition for me because I'm literally moving into a new personal year. It's my birthday, it's my solar return, and I also still associate autumn, September in particular, with back to school season and that kind of change and transition. So it is a time for big personal shifts. And even if nothing in my life is really shifting in a big way, it is that time when I revisit those ideas. And this deck is maybe a little bit heavier than any of my personal changes need to be, but it speaks to that, like I say, liminal, transitional time. Autumn is a threshold, death is a threshold, birthdays are a threshold. So it all works. That is the Death Doula Oracle. Autumn is associated with some really rich myth and folklore and festivals and rituals. It contains so much magical atmosphere as a season. And the next stack of decks I'm going to share carry that witchy kind of quality. When thinking about autumn and witchy magical decks, my first instinct was the Witch Sister Tarot. And I must have had this deck now for about a year and a half. I still haven't really worked with it. I set up a study notebook, which I haven't touched in at least a year. Maybe I'll study this autumn. Maybe I will just get out of my own way and use it. But this is such a gorgeous autumnal deck. First of all, can we just appreciate the magpies in the Three of Skies, which is the air suit, the sword suit. Visually, I think this is perfect for autumn. It's such a rich, saturated color palette. It feels like late summer, early autumn, like September. It's getting cold. We've got those gorgeous, vibrant colors on the trees and the leaves. And maybe, especially here in the UK, maybe there's also a little bit of a late summer, September heat wave happening. So it feels potent as well, is how I've described this deck before. This feels like the moment before a thunderstorm where there's just so much energy and it's about to break. Something's about to happen. So that is the energy I get from the Witch Sister, which is just so perfect for the autumn season. And also it being a witchy deck is also perfect for the autumn season in that sense, if you associate autumn with like magic and witchiness and that kind of ritual. Sure, I said this last year, but I fully intend on working with this year. I love also like the squirrels here and the like brown leaves. Like this is such an autumn image. It's beautiful. The artwork in this is absolutely stunning. I also really like this scythe here in the Six of Trees, which is equivalent to the Six of Wands, like that kind of harvest season sort of energy with the poppies. I think this is just generally quite an autumnal deck in a lot of ways. So there we go. That is the Witch Sister as a witchy magical autumn deck. Next up is the Raven's Prophecy Tarot. I'm sure this is a popular choice as an autumn deck. Again, I'm sure I've pulled this out as an autumn deck before. First of all, these colours, the orange around the borders is so Halloween. The orange and the black is so Halloween. These are our backs as well. Like, it's very Halloween coded. And in general, the black backgrounds, this kind of nighttime scenery in a lot of them. Again, that's a bit of a theme in this video. I like a black background. It feels late summer. It feels autumnal. It feels also quite cozy. But the big reason this is reading as an autumn deck to me is because the book series that this deck is based on, the Raven Cycle book series, is so much about magic. There's tarot in that series. There's sort of witchcraft. There is myth and legend come to life. Liminality is a really big theme in those books. Dreams are a really big theme in those books. So it really does tie in perfectly with this kind of witchy ritual collection of decks that I am sharing in this video. Additionally, this has been on my desk for the last month and I haven't touched it, so I really want to keep it out and show it some love. But yeah, that is the Raven's Prophecy Tarot as a witchy kind of a deck. Okay, I have a few more deck groupings that I've been playing with this last month. First up is the Ritual Tarot, the Thoth Tarot, and the Wild Unknown Pocket Archetypes deck. These are three of my favorite decks, but I have only recently actually tried reading them all together. I also added in the Lilith Tarot, so I was reading with a group of 4 decks, but the Lilith Tarot doesn't feel so autumnal, so I've left it out of this video. Not least of all because I have a sense this video might be quite long, but who doesn't love a lengthy tarot collection video? I know I'm not alone. Anyway, the sort of centerpiece of this is the Ritual Tarot, and the Ritual Tarot is what feels, unsurprisingly, like a magical, witchy ritual kind of deck. But these others go so well with it. The Thoth is its own kind of magic. I think I'm not alone in thinking that. And then the Pocket Archetypes is one of those decks that I don't feel like I know it. I don't feel like it's familiar, but every time I use it, it feels so rich. It feels honestly kind of magical. Like it adds so much to my readings. So these three together are intense. They're a lot. This is not a light and fluffy reading, but I don't think autumn is necessarily the time for light and fluffy readings. I think a lot of us like to dive into shadow work in autumn. I know a lot of people do kind of ancestral work in autumn, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute actually with the next pairing. But it is not an easy breezy grouping, but it's so worth it. And they talk so well together. And maybe that's because I love all of these decks. And I will actually say all three of these decks are not decks that feel easy to me. They don't feel like grab and go, easy breezy, quick, no thought kind of decks, if that makes sense. But I do love each of them individually. I love reading with them. I love working with them. They're worth the time and the effort that I put into reading their messages. But yeah, I love them individually. I love them together. They have some really gorgeous, potent messages. And I just really enjoy working with them. Like, I like these for the process of reading with each of them as much as the kind of answers I get. I don't really read with tarot in general to get answers. But these decks in particular, I read with for the experience of reading with them rather than the answers I get out of them. So that is the Thoth Tarot, the Ritual Tarot, and the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck as a trio of deep, magical, witchy ritual decks. And then the last decks in this particular section of this video, these witchy and magical decks, is the Circle of Doors Tarot and the When Olga Speaks Oracle. Similar to the last grouping, these are both decks that are favorites of mine individually, but also fast becoming a favorite pairing of decks. I think they work so well together. Visually, they're just absolutely gorgeous. They both got the black borders. The only real color is from the When Olga Speaks, but because it is, I think it's 70s, like Nat Geo magazines that it's collaged from, there's the film look and these kind of like muted almost colors, and then the black and white, or the almost black and white, in the Circle of Doors. I mentioned earlier that this is kind of the season for shadow work and for ancestor work specifically for a lot of people. Ancestor work isn't something that I do in my tarot practice, but this deck, the When Olga Speaks, is perfect for that. And even regardless of that, this is a really good deck for working with ideas of death and ancestry and grief, which I really value in my practice. I just think it's a fantastic deck, but also is perfect for this time of year. The Circle of Doors also is very intense. Like, this again is quite an intense pairing, similar to the last trio. These are both decks that I like working with for the sake of working with them, not just to get an answer, which again isn't really how I practice in general, but I don't just read with these to get a response. I want to work with them. I want to dive into the guidebooks. I want to spend time with the cards and see what they have to say to me. And autumn is the perfect season for that. It is time to hunker down, study a little bit maybe, spend some real time journaling, spend some time doing some shadow work, or just thinking deeply and reading deeply. So that is the Circle of Doors Tarot and the When Olga Speaks Oracle deck. Finally, there is a quieter side to autumn with a earthy, grounding energy of study and steady practice. And these are the decks that I am going to be leaning on to anchor with and to slow down as the nights draw in this autumn. I'm going to kick off this final category of decks with the Halloween Tarot in a Tin. Quite literally, 'tis the season. Well, when you see this, I think it's technically still August, but it will be the season very shortly. And I like to have a Rider-Waite-Smith on hand, on deck, if you will, for when I do want to do kind of like a quick and easy reading, when I do want to do something that is a little bit more straightforward, as opposed to like the Circle of Doors, the ritual that I was just talking about. And this is such a good Rider-Waite-Smith clone. Like, this is one of my favorite cards, I think, the King of Pumpkins, which is the King of Pentacles. You can see like all the same symbolism is there, even down to his like busy decorated clothing. Like, it's a really good Rider-Waite-Smith clone, but it's also fun. This is a little bit more light-hearted. It leans into the spooky season vibe. It also feels a little bit nostalgic. Like, the illustration is by Kipling West, who has also illustrated like children's books. So it feels fun, feels nostalgic. And in comparison to some of the decks in this list, it is a little bit more lighthearted. And I think it doesn't necessarily need to read as like deep and dark and intense. This can be a little bit more fun, a little bit more easy breezy. So yeah, that is the Halloween Tarot, which is my Rider-Waite-Smith that I want to have on hand. It's practical, like I said, it's everyday carry, it's a practical size, it's practical because it's in a tin, it's practical because it's Rider-Waite-Smith based, and it's easy to read. And I don't need to spend a long time getting into the weeds with it and diving into guidebooks and really thinking really deeply, which, don't get me wrong, I love to do, but sometimes I do in fact just want a quick question and a quick answer. So that is the Halloween Tarot. Next up is the Herbal Astrology deck, and this also feels like quite earthy, quite grounding. The color palette is really blends into my background here, doesn't it? It's earthy, it's kind of grungy, it's kind of moody, it's kind of muted. It's not the intense sunlit kind of vibe of summer. It's not the starkness of winter. It's a little bit softer. The theme of this, it's herbs and astrology, so it feels very earthy, but also astrology is something I'm really big into studying right now. And this fits that. And currently it's Virgo season. September is back to school season. It is time to study things, and I definitely will be continuing to study astrology in my own personal practice this autumn. I'm really getting into good habits with it. Let me know if you want to see something about that here on YouTube, if you want to see a video of how I'm studying astrology maybe. This also gives me herbs to study. In case one system isn't enough, I can also study the herbal associations with astrology, which is something that I find very interesting. I don't know what I'm doing with it, but I am excited to learn. So that is the Herbal Astrology Oracle. And I have also pulled the Crow Tarot out to kind of read alongside it. I just think they look so cute together. They're both mini decks, and I think they really work. So that is the Crow Tarot, which I've pulled out. This is also another kind of fairly straightforward Rider-Waite-Smith interpretation. So it's nice to have another one of those out on my desk, and I just think they look so cute together. The Crow Tarot with the Herbal Astrology Oracle may well be a pairing that I reach for, although I may also reach for the Herbal Astrology by itself. I might reach for it with other things even. Giving myself lots of options this autumn. Since I am talking about earthy, grounded decks, I also will pull out the Awakening Tarot. This is one that I have really been loving since I acquired it early this year, actually. I was reaching for this loads in the spring. I have also been reaching for it over the summer. Like, this is just a new favorite. So partly it's in this list because I don't want it off my desk. But also, even though this is an elemental tarot and it is supposed to speak to all the elements, this feels earthy to me over anything else. Autumn feels like an earthy season, I think, because everything is kind of going back into the ground. Again, I keep talking about decomposition and decay, but the leaves are falling, everything is sort of like composting, everything is going back underground. I don't know, bears are hibernating. I want to be hibernating, like that kind of thing. It feels like an earthy season. And this brings that energy, but also this is a fantastic deck to study. I don't intend to be doing a specific deck study with this deck in and of itself, but it is a fantastic deck to reach for the guidebook with in case I didn't get enough of like deep, long readings with something like the Ritual Tarot, the When Olga Speaks. I can spend a lot of time with this deck reaching for the guidebook. I think there's journaling prompts in there. There's various different ways to interpret the cards in that guidebook. It's fantastic. This also was a deck that I pulled out for Virgo season. In my decks for Virgo season, if you caught that. If not, I'll link it below. But this is a deck that I have associated with Virgo season. And so it also just feels appropriate that I keep this out while we're still in Virgo season. And in that sense, it also feels earthy to me. So that is the Awakening Tarot. And that is everything. Those are 3 different clusters of decks that I intend to reach for over the next few months. As always, I'm not limiting myself to these. I'm not forbidding myself from reaching for other decks. I'm sure I will reach for other decks, not least of all because I am always doing something different in the Tarot Lab, which you can join us over on Patreon, by the way. In September, we're doing timing techniques, and I'm always reaching for different decks that work for whatever it is we're studying in the Tarot Lab every single month. So this is not everything I will be working with. I'm not going to force myself to reach for these if I'm feeling inspired to grab something else, but they all feel very autumnal. We've got some practical decks, some magical decks, some kind of liminal transitional decks that I think are going to serve me really well this autumn season. So let me know what you think. What decks do you like working with in the autumn season? If you had to pick one of these, which would it be? And what else do you plan on working with that I haven't mentioned? If you would like to go deeper into seasonal tarot experiments, then do join us over on Patreon in the Tarot Lab. There's a link for that in the description, along with a link to my Etsy store for readings and my tarot zines. By the way, I am going to be pausing my readings. I will be closing my books during October. So if you've been wanting a reading from me, September is the month to do it because I'll be going away. I'll be away from home. I will be unable to do readings in October. So that is linked in the description. My Patreon is linked in the description. All of these decks will be linked in the description, all that good stuff. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I really hope you have enjoyed. Give me a like if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.